The notice showed up overnight, taped crooked to my front gate like somebody wanted it to be seen before I even had my first cup of coffee. Bold letters, red ink, the kind of thing that doesn't ask questions, it makes accusations. And right there at the top it said my propane tank was unsafe, outdated, non-compliant. Basically a hazard to the entire neighborhood, which would have been funny if it wasn't sitting on land my family had owned for 32 years. I remember just standing there in my boots, keys still in my hand, staring at it longer than I should have. Like maybe if I read it twice it would make more sense, but it didn't. It just got worse the more I looked at it. And the strange part wasn't even the accusation. It was who it came from. Cedar Ridge Homeowners Association. That name hadn't meant anything to me 5 years ago. Now apparently, they thought they had a say over my property. Now, I'm not the kind of guy who jumps straight into a fight. I fix things for a living, HVAC mostly. Been doing it long enough to know that when something doesn't make sense, you don't swing at it. You trace it, you follow the line back to the source. So I didn't rip the notice down right away. I just leaned on the gate, read it again, and kind of let that quiet irritation settle in, the kind that sits low in your chest and waits. Because the truth was, that tank had passed every inspection it had ever been through. County, state, even a private audit 3 winters back, when we had that deep freeze that knocked out half the grid. That tank wasn't just legal, it was reliable, and reliability is something people don't think about until it disappears. Cedar Ridge, though, they were newer. A planned community built right up against what used to be open farmland. My land, technically, wasn't part of their development, never had been, but when they expanded, they got close enough that the lines started to blur in their heads. I'd seen it coming, little things at first. A letter about fence height that didn't apply to me. Someone asking about community standards, like I'd signed something I never saw. It always came with a smile, polite, rehearsed, like they were doing me a favor explaining how things worked now. But this was different. This wasn't a suggestion. This was a violation notice with a compliance deadline and a threat of fines. I pulled the tape off slowly, folded the paper once, twice, and stuck it in my jacket pocket. Didn't crumple it. Didn't tear it. That probably would have felt good for about 2 seconds, and then it'd be gone. No, this needed to stay intact. Inside the house, the place smelled like coffee and dust, and that faint metallic warmth from the heating system cycling on. I set the notice on the kitchen table and just stood there for a minute, hands on the back of the chair, thinking, not about what they said, but why they said it. Because people don't usually go out of their way to be wrong unless they think they're right. By noon, I had the old permit files spread out across the table. Folders I hadn't opened in years. Yellowed edges, stamped approvals, inspection signatures, dates that went back further than Cedar Ridge even existed. I took photos of everything. Not rushed, not sloppy. Clear, steady, 1 page at a time. If this turned into something bigger, I wasn't going to rely on memory. Around 2, I drove out to the county office. Small building, always smells like paper and air conditioning. The clerk there, Diane, she's been there forever, knows more about zoning than anyone I've met. I handed her the notice without saying much, just watched her read it. Her eyebrows went up about halfway through. Cedar Ridge sent this? She asked. Looks that way. She leaned back in her chair, tapped the paper lightly against the desk. They don't have jurisdiction over your parcel. Not even close. I figured, I said. But figured isn't the same as proving. She gave a small smile at that, like she appreciated the difference. Then she turned to her computer, pulled up maps, zoning overlays, the kind of stuff that looks complicated until someone who understands it explains it simply. My property sat just outside their boundary, clearly marked, no overlap, no ambiguity. Your tank, she added, glancing at the file number, was approved under rural utility exemption. That hasn't changed. I nodded, took notes, printed copies of the maps. Again, not rushing. There's a rhythm to this kind of thing. You gather, you verify, you build something solid before you ever push back. Driving home, though, something started to bother me. Not the notice itself, but the wording. The way they described the tank like it was isolated, like it only served my house. That wasn't exactly true. See, years ago, when we upgraded the system, we didn't just install a tank for residential use. We built in a regulated feed, a backup line designed to support a small auxiliary grid that connected to a few older buildings down the road. Nothing fancy, nothing public-facing, but during outages, it helped stabilize heating in a pinch. It wasn't something people talked about, because it didn't need to be. It just worked. And that's the thing about systems that just work. People forget they're there. When I got back, there was a second envelope wedged in the gate. This one wasn't taped. It was slid through, like whoever left it didn't want to be seen. Inside was a printed notice from Cedar Ridge again, more formal this time, outlining enforcement steps. Contractor access authorization. Timeline for disconnection and removal. I let out a slow breath, looked down the road toward their development. Rows of identical roofs catching the late afternoon light. Neat, organized, controlled. All right, I muttered to myself, folding the second notice. Now I see where this is going. Because this wasn't about safety. It wasn't even about the tank. This was about control, and they were about to find out they didn't understand what they were trying to control. I didn't sleep much that night, not because I was worried, but because my mind kept running through possibilities, tracing connections the same way I would with a faulty system. You know, pressure here affects flow there. Shut one valve, and something else compensates, or fails. And the more I thought about it, the clearer it became. Cedar Ridge wasn't just overstepping. They were acting fast, too fast for something they actually understood, which usually means one thing. They thought this was simple. The next morning, I called the number listed on the notice. Took 3 transfers before I got someone who sounded like they had any authority. A man named Greg Halvorson. Introduced himself like he'd practiced it, calm voice, measured tone, the kind of guy who believes procedure is the same as being right. Mr. Carter, he said, we've identified a compliance issue regarding your propane installation. You mean the one that passed inspection every year for over a decade? I cut in, not raising my voice, just keeping it steady. There was a pause, brief but noticeable. Our records indicate the system no longer meets current HOA safety guidelines. I'm not in your HOA. Another pause, longer this time. I could almost hear him choosing his next words. Your property directly impacts the community infrastructure. That was interesting. First honest thing he'd said. In what way? I asked. We've received reports regarding shared utility influence, he replied, slipping back into that careful language. Out of an abundance of caution, we're standardizing all systems within our operational radius. I leaned against the kitchen counter, staring out the window toward the tank sitting quiet and solid where it had always been. You planning to standardize county zoning too, Greg? He didn't laugh. Figures. We're moving forward with contractor access tomorrow, he said. You'll want to be compliant before penalties begin. And just like that, conversation over. Not angry, not aggressive, just certain. That kind of certainty is dangerous when it's built on incomplete information. By mid-afternoon, I got a call from Lena. She manages maintenance for a cluster of older buildings about half a mile down the road. Brick structures, not part of Cedar Ridge, but close enough that systems overlap in ways most people don't think about. You hear anything weird about your supply lines? She asked, no greeting, straight to it. I stepped outside, closing the door behind me. Define weird. We've been seeing slight pressure dips on backup cycles, she said. Nothing critical yet, but it's new. That tight feeling in my chest came back, sharper this time. When did it start? Couple days ago. What? I looked at the notices in my hand. Because someone's about to make it a lot worse. There was a silence on her end now, the kind where you can tell someone's already thinking 3 steps ahead. Tell me they're not touching your system. They think they are. Evan, her voice dropped, serious now. That feed stabilizes our auxiliary heat when the main grid fluctuates. If they interrupt that. I know, I said quietly. I know. We hung up not long after that. No dramatic goodbye, just that shared understanding that something preventable was about to happen anyway. The next morning, they showed up right on schedule. 2 trucks, clean logos, efficient, like they'd done this 100 times before. The kind of contractors who follow orders, not context. I walked out to meet them before they even reached the gate. You guys here for the tank? I asked. One of them, tall, mid-40s maybe, checked his clipboard. We've got authorization for line disconnection and system isolation. From Cedar Ridge. That's right. I nodded slowly, hands in my pockets. You aware that system feeds more than just this property? He hesitated, just for a second. We go by the work orders, sir. Yeah, I said, almost to myself. That's what I figured. I could have blocked them. Legally, I probably should have. But there's a moment sometimes where stopping something too early means no one ever understands how bad it could have been. And a part of me, Not the reckless part, but the part that's seen systems fail quietly before. Knew this needed to play out just far enough. All right, I said, stepping back from the gate. Do what you're here to do. They got to work quickly. Valves checked, lines traced, tools clinking against metal in that steady, methodical rhythm. I watched from a distance, arms crossed, not interfering, just observing. One of them paused at the regulator assembly, frowning slightly. This setup's a little different, he muttered to the other guy. Just isolate the primary feed, the second one replied. That's what the order says. And that was it. That was the moment. A small decision, barely a conversation, but it carried weight they didn't understand. When they closed that line, there was no dramatic sound, no explosion, no immediate sign that anything had gone wrong. Just a subtle shift, something you wouldn't notice unless you were looking for it. Pressure equalizing where it shouldn't. Flow rerouting through paths that weren't meant to handle it alone. They packed up within the hour. One of them gave me a polite nod on the way out. You're all set. I almost smiled at that. Yeah, I said. We'll see. For the rest of the day, everything felt normal. Too normal. The kind of quiet that doesn't reassure you. It just delays the inevitable. I checked my system. Everything on my end still functioning, tank steady, regulators holding. Because of how it was designed, my primary usage wasn't affected. That's the irony of redundancy. It protects the source while everything downstream starts to feel the strain. By evening, the temperature started to drop. Not extreme, but enough to push systems into heavier use. That's when the first call came in. Not to me, but to Lena. She texted first. We're seeing bigger drops. Then another message. Heat's fluctuating. Then finally, a call. It's not stabilizing, she said. And I could hear the background noise now. People talking, doors opening and closing. That low hum of a building that's starting to have problems. Backup's not kicking in the way it should. I leaned against the wall, closing my eyes for a second. Because it can't, I said. They cut the feed. Jesus. Yeah. What do we do? I opened my eyes, staring at the ceiling like the answer might be written there. Right now? You document everything. Temps, pressure readings, times. Don't guess. Don't assume. Just record. And you? I let out a slow breath. I'm going to let them figure out what they did. That might sound cold, I know. But this wasn't about proving a point anymore. This was about making sure when the truth came out, it couldn't be ignored or explained away. Over the next 2 days, things unraveled exactly the way I thought they would. Just slower, quieter, and somehow worse because of it. No alarms, no single moment where everything failed. Just a gradual loss of stability. Heating systems cycling harder, struggling to maintain output. Residents complaining about inconsistent warmth. Maintenance teams chasing symptoms without seeing the cause. Cedar Ridge, from what I heard, initially blamed internal inefficiencies. Then equipment wear. Then weather patterns. Anything that didn't point back to their own decision. But systems don't lie. Not if you know how to read them. By the third night, temperatures dropped further, and that's when inconvenience turned into problem. Buildings started losing consistent heat altogether. Emergency calls went out. Temporary closures were discussed. People bundled up inside their own homes, wondering why something so basic had suddenly become unreliable. And through all of it, my tank sat there, quiet as ever, fully operational, doing exactly what it was designed to do. Untouched, uncompromised, and very, very important to a system that no longer had access to it. Sometime around midnight, my phone rang again. Different number this time. Mr. Carter. A voice said, more urgent than Greg's had been. This is Mark Delaney with Cedar Ridge Operations. We're experiencing some unexpected heating disruptions, and I let him talk for a second, just long enough to hear the edge in his voice. Then I said calmly, yeah, I was wondering when you'd call. There was a long pause on the other end of the line after I said that. Not silence exactly, more like the sound of someone realizing they were no longer in control of the conversation. I could hear papers shifting, maybe a hand over the receiver, muffled voices in the background, the kind of quiet chaos that happens when a problem gets bigger than the room it started in. Mr. Carter, Mark said finally, voice tighter now, less polished than before. We're trying to understand if your system is connected in any way to. It is, I said, not dragging it out, not making him work for it. Has been for years. Another pause, shorter this time. That wasn't disclosed. I almost laughed at that, but I held it back. It wasn't hidden either. You could feel the shift right there, the moment where assumption starts turning into liability. He cleared his throat. We may need temporary access to. No, I said, still calm, still even. You already had access. You used it. That landed. Harder than anything else I could have said. I'd recommend, I added after a second, you start talking to the county before this gets worse. He didn't argue. That was new. We'll look into that. Yeah, I said quietly. You should. When the call ended, I set the phone down on the table and just stood there for a while, listening to the house, the low hum of everything working the way it was supposed to. It's strange what you notice in moments like that, the steadiness of something you built versus the instability of something you didn't. By morning, it wasn't just a Cedar Ridge problem anymore. County inspectors showed up around 10. Not rushed, not frantic, just focused. 2 vehicles, official markings, clipboards, equipment cases. The kind of presence that doesn't need to announce itself. I walked out to meet them halfway down the drive. Mr. Carter? One of them asked. That's me. We're here regarding a reported utility disruption. I nodded toward the tank. You're going to want to start there, and then follow the line outward. They did exactly that. No assumptions, no shortcuts. Measurements taken, connections traced, documentation cross-checked in real time. I stayed out of their way for the most part, answered questions when they asked, kept it factual. No opinions, no commentary. This wasn't the time for that. About an hour in, one of them, older guy, probably seen more cases like this than he cared to count, looked up from a set of readings and just shook his head slightly. Who authorized the disconnect? He asked. Cedar Ridge HOA, I said. He exhaled through his nose, not surprised, just disappointed. They don't have jurisdiction here. I'm aware. Apparently they weren't. That might have been the closest thing to humor in the entire situation. They followed the downstream connections next, out past my property line, into the web of infrastructure that most people never think about. It didn't take long before everything lined up. The pressure drop, the timing, the disconnection point. Cause and effect, clean and undeniable. By early afternoon, Cedar Ridge had representatives on site. Greg was there this time, along with Mark and a couple of others I didn't recognize. They stood off to the side at first, talking in low voices, glancing over at the inspectors like students waiting outside a principal's office. Eventually, Greg walked over. Mr. Carter, he said, and for the first time, that confidence in his voice had cracks in it, small ones, but enough. It seems there may have been a misunderstanding. I looked at him for a second, not angry, not satisfied, just steady. That's one way to put it. He nodded, like he was agreeing with me and hoping that would smooth things over. We're working to resolve the situation as quickly as possible. You mean fix what you broke? Another pause. He didn't correct me this time. Yes. Behind him, the inspectors were going over their findings with Mark, pointing at diagrams, explaining things in that clear, direct way that leaves very little room for interpretation. I caught pieces of it. Shared infrastructure, unauthorized interference, safety risk, liability exposure. Words that carry weight, especially when they're written down. What happens now? Greg asked. I glanced past him, toward the road where contractor trucks were already starting to line up again, this time without the same confidence they had a couple days ago. Now, I said, now you put it back the way it was, and then you deal with everything that comes after. And there was a lot that came after. Repairs started immediately. Emergency authorizations, expedited permits, crews working longer hours than they probably expected when they first took the job. But fixing a system isn't the same as restoring trust in it. That takes longer. The county didn't just stop at the physical repairs either. There were citations issued, formal notices, documentation of overreach, of interference with a protected utility system. The kind of paperwork that doesn't disappear just because the problem gets fixed, from what I heard. And yeah, you hear things in a place like that. Cedar Ridge ended up facing penalties that made my original violation look like pocket change. Not just fines, but liability for the disruptions, the emergency responses, the temporary closures. All the things they hadn't considered when they decided to act first and understand later. My tank, on the other hand, was officially reevaluated, documented again, and reaffirmed as fully compliant. Same as it had always been. Nothing changed, except now it was written down in a way that even they couldn't ignore. By the time winter really set in, Things had stabilized again. Heat restored, systems balanced, life going back to normal in that quiet way it does after a disruption. Cedar Ridge didn't make any public announcements about it. No apologies, no explanations. The notices they'd sent out just stopped. Even the one on my gate disappeared. Not taken down in front of me, not acknowledged. Just gone one morning, like it had never been there. But I remembered. And so did everyone else who had to sit in a cold apartment for a couple nights wondering what went wrong. A week or so after everything settled, I ran into Lena again. She was tired, you could see it, but there was a kind of relief there too. Systems holding steady, she said. Better than before, actually. Good, I replied. She studied me for a second, then shook her head with a small smile. You knew this was going to happen, didn't you? I shrugged a little. I knew what could happen. And you just let it? That question hung there for a moment. Fair question. Honest one. I didn't cause it, I said finally. I just didn't stop them from proving it. She nodded slowly, like she understood more than she agreed. Still, that's a hell of a way to make a point. Wasn't about the point, I said. Was about the truth holding up on its own. We stood there a minute longer, cold air, quiet street, everything working the way it should again. Before she left, she said, You think they learned anything from this? I looked out towards Cedar Ridge, neat houses, straight lines, everything looking exactly the way it was designed to. Maybe, I said. Or maybe they just learned to be quieter about it. And that's the thing that sticks with me. Not the notice, not the fines, not even the repairs. It's how easy it was for someone to step in, assume authority, and start making decisions about something they didn't fully understand, and how long it took for that to unravel. Because it always does, eventually. Systems don't care about confidence. Pipes don't respond to titles. And heat, real, necessary heat, doesn't show up just because someone says it should. It shows up because everything behind it is working the way it's supposed to. Or it doesn't. And when it doesn't, people notice. So yeah, that's what happened. Now I'm curious what you think. Was I right to let it play out the way it did? To step back and let them face the consequences of their own decisions? Or should I have stepped in earlier, stopped it before anyone else got affected? Even if it meant they never really understood what they were messing with? Because out here, it's not always about who's right on paper. Sometimes it's about who understands what's actually connected and who's willing to take responsibility when it all comes apart. Let me know where you stand.